Your Minnesota Vikings have taken the big, important step in creating a championship caliber football team after the firings of Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer by hiring their next GM, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Cleveland Browns VP of Football Operations. It's a very exciting time. I know, obviously, this
finally,
I know it's like people need to be patient. I mean, everyone was so worried that we weren't moving fast enough. And at the end of the day, they got one of the guys they wanted. I mean, obviously, it came down to Ryan Poles from the Chiefs and Kwesi. And Ryan Poles, unfortunately, took the job with the Bears before he got here for an interview.
We wanted Kwesi anyway. We all know that. All the fans knew that the whole time.
Exactly. I mean, I know it was out there saying that Poles was, the number one commodity, the number one wanted guy for the Vikings. At the end of the day, they got it. I mean, they interviewed 8 people, and Kwesi and Poles were 1 and 2. So, obviously Kwesi was highly regarded by the Wilfs for this position. We'll get into this a little more, but I just think it's going to be a fresh outlook. Obviously, Spielman and a lot of people said this about Poles as well. We're more of like that not the analytical guy, but the guys that came up through the scouting ranks. Yeah. And more along the lines of just like the kind of the corporate GM, the guy you normally see in a position like that.
Right.
And Kwesi is going to be the more analytical guy, kind of due to his background, which we'll get into more later, as I said. And I don't know, I'm excited about it. At first, I was disappointed to hear Poles wasn't coming here, but when I really kind of dug into things about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I'm pretty pumped. I think it's going to be a really exciting hire.
Yeah, I agree. When I first saw that the finalists was between Poles and Kwesi, I kind of looked into them both a little deeper, and yeah, the whole Poles' whole background and stuff is pretty comforting, I guess. But I knew even with Kwesi, I didn't know who I would really rather have, but I knew with Kwesi, it was kind of like that. It's just, I knew that would be like the more exciting hire because you just don't really know what to expect from him because it's just different. It's kind of the wild card. It could be, that boom or bust thing potentially, hopefully a boom and not the bust, but I don't know. There's that exciting thing. We don't really know what will happen. Maybe he is like this, genius draft guru guy. And he ends up being a really good GM because he sees and does things differently than everybody else. But yeah, I mean,
another thing is he's always been around a lot of, obviously he was with the 49ers beforehand and now with the Browns. And he was involved in a lot of really good draft classes. And I'm sure, obviously he wasn't the guy making the final decision, but he definitely had a lot of say as to what went on and helped, kind of help them scout these guys and figure out what kind of people they're looking for. So he's been around successful drafts. So I think he knows what that looks like. So, yeah. Another reason to be excited as well.
Right. And we'll kind of go into him a little bit deeper with what other people have said about him and stuff like that. But let's, we got some visuals here that we'll run through and kind of get a better idea of who Kwesi is.
But before we jump into that, I think Jamie's got something to say about the old podcast here.
Yeah. Probably throwing a plug real quick. Thanks everybody for watching. This is GG Sport podcast for the Minnesota Vikings. Please hit that subscribe button to see more content made by us. And yeah, thank you. And let's roll.
All right. So let's jump into that slideshow we put together here. It's a little bit of background on Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, 40 years old, relatively young for people in this position. I think you could tell a couple of these guys, him and Poles and a couple other ones, like people are kind of getting younger. I think everybody's wanting to get that younger mindset. So yeah. I really think that is a good direction to go in, especially with this new age of players coming in.
Right.
You need guys that'll kind of be able to adapt and get and kind of be on a better, like a personal level with these guys. And I think going younger is going to be the first step in that. Was very shocked to see that they announced what kind of deal he was getting. I've never seen that with GMs before.
Yeah, maybe I've been paying attention
because it's been so long since we've hired one that we didn't get to see that. But I just didn't think that type of information about front office people and coaches was out there. But as you can see here, he signed a 4-year, $12 million deal with the Minnesota Vikings. And as we kind of mentioned before, his style, he's a lot more analytical. And I know in the next slide, when we get into his background, we'll kind of talk more about that. But again, I think a very interesting approach to being a general manager for a football team.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is pretty interesting to see because he doesn't really have much of a football background that I've heard. I think he had like a little bit of a basketball background. So that part's kind of interesting. But
he's only been in the NFL for 10 years.
For 10 years, yes. I mean, assuming he was you want to kind of know, I wonder what drove him to the NFL. Like, I wish there was information, at least maybe I haven't found it yet, and we'll probably hear more about it later on, is like what brought him. and I'm probably kind of going into his background a little bit already, but brought him from Wall Street to the NFL. So I'm assuming he probably was a big fan at the very least. But I mean, his perspectives could be, a lot different than a lot of his GMs. And we're talking about age 40 is pretty young, and Ryan Poles was much younger. How old was he? Like 36 or 34?
36.
So 36. So he's a little older than him, which, maybe he'll have a little bit more experience. Actually, well, because I think Ryan Poles, I think he's been doing it for like 13 years or something like that. But for him to go in 10 years without having an NFL background and to go through the ranks from, starting in the NFL without any background or whatever, and then going all the way up to where he is now as a GM in 10 years is pretty impressive. So, but yeah, what do you think? Anything else on this one?
No, I think we're good. Let's get into his path to being GM of the Minnesota Vikings.
His background. So this is when we can get more into his background here. So it's really interesting. Economics degree from Princeton, which is Ivy League school, master's degree from Stanford.
Highly accredited.
What's that?
Highly accredited school in Stanford.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Where Andrew Luck went, and we know how smart that guy is. Associate portfolio manager at Taylor Woods Capital, and was a VP at Credit Suisse, I don't know how to say that, as a commodities trader. So pretty much he was a day trader on Wall Street, which is very interesting because I haven't read if he was a successful day trader or not yet, but if he was, that's a very hard thing to become good at. So if he can do that very well, and I'm assuming he must be if he got a shot at the NFL, then this guy knows what he's doing with numbers and analytics and news, and being able to take all that information to predict an outcome. So I think that's very interesting. And then in 2013, he went to the 49ers, into the NFL as a manager of football research and development. And then in 2020, as we know, the Browns GM Andrew Berry hires him to be the VP of football operations. So in that actually less than 10-year period, he went into the NFL coming from Wall Street, and then came up and now he's a GM of the Minnesota Vikings. And it's very interesting path that he's taken, and it's exciting path.
Yeah,
I think.
I'm curious what research and development for a football team is. I don't think anybody's ever really talked about that. Maybe he'll get asked that in his interviews with the media and stuff. But I'm curious what that is, and if he's going to try to implement something like that with this team. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we both kind of were talking about before this, he's very like we thought. I mean, already obviously analytical. He's always he thinks a lot about everything. I know he kind of mentioned in a quote that he likes to ask why a lot. So he I think that's just going to be a really interesting perspective, instead of just like thinking, coming up through the ranks of scouting, like I know what to look for, I know all this stuff. Right. I mean, obviously I'll take information from around me, but with him, it's more of just like, I am doing a lot of this work myself. Yes. But I'm also asking a bunch of people around me for their opinions. And I think that's just kind of how, obviously if you're going to be a trader on like Wall Street and stuff, yeah, you got to know your stuff, but you take a lot of information from other people as well. I feel like news, to get like the full scope of what you're dealing with potentially.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. And that, I did see a video with him talking about that, and how, maybe he doesn't have this football background, but he is such a team player, and is so good and so open to taking other people's opinions and ideas, that he's going to have the people around him who did have football backgrounds, and like guys like Ryan Poles around him, who he will take opinion. He's just the guy who makes the final decision, and that final decision probably will be a little bit more about the analytics, but that is taking into account of whatever anybody else says. And that's just like a real good quality of just a good leader in general. So to know that he's willing to do that and come in and take those opinions, and he's not going to be biased, being like, no, I play football for this many years, and like I'm just like, I know what I'm talking about and stuff like that. I'm not sure, maybe a lot of GMs aren't like that, but I could see how that would work. And he's been openly about taking other opinions and being able to use those to kind of come up with the best result.
Actually, I'll there's a direct quote relating to this that I found. I found it on the Cleveland Browns website. when he did his interview back with the Browns when he was hired there. He said, "My job is going to be another person who knows enough about everybody's point of view to come together and make a good decision." He said, "That is where I see my role, and this is where I see a lot of my value. I have my perspective, and I'll bring that to the table, but I also have an appreciation for everybody else's perspective, not only from my time in San Francisco, but also my time as a trader, to be honest. There are a lot of people who win a lot of different ways, and you come to appreciate that. And at the end of the day, you are just trying to make a better decision." So,
Hell yeah. I love
exactly.
that. I
Right.
love it. He's a
Right.
team guy. As long as he has good people around him, man, I think they can come up with great decisions for
Yeah.
us.
And kind of a different sway from how it sounded like things ended with the Spielman era, where it sounded like, I mean, obviously Spielman and Zimmer
Oh
seem
yeah.
to have two totally separate mindsets on things. And it feels like both of them were very stubborn and didn't really want to sway from their own mindset. And it sounds like Kwesi is going to be much more accepting almost of everybody else's thoughts and opinions. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, as we've talked about, he's going to have the final say, but I think he's going to be the type that will listen to everybody and obviously, bounces ideas off everybody to see if they're coming to the best conclusion for how to make this football team championship caliber.
Well, as you say that, actually, and we've mentioned this before, is the idea of the Wolves. They've mentioned talking to the players and bringing the players in and getting their ideas. So it looks like the Wolves are really trying to turn this entire organization into like one collaborating thing, and I think that could be super powerful. And going from the Wolves, the ownerships, to all the way down to the players, and then to the GM. And I'm assuming they're going to hire a coach that is definitely like that and willing to be open-minded and hear other people's ideas. You are the leader, and you do have to make and be confident with that final decisions, whether you're a head coach or a GM. But just the fact that you're trying to put everybody in there and get the opinions all the way to the players and things like that, I think that's how a company would be built. That's how any organization, I think, should be ran. So I'm really excited for that they're heading in that direction and not trying to get like this stubborn old school, I know everything type of
Right.
mindset. So
Which,
I think that's really cool. And I think,
yeah.
I think our head coach is probably going to have that same type of mentality, and hopefully we can get this whole thing rolling as like one whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So speaking of head coaches, maybe get into, because
Well,
obviously,
actually, before jumping into that, I did want to just put this out there right away. Well, boom, the Minnesota Moneyball. This is the guys. This is what's going to happen. We're going to turn everything around with Kwesi.
all right. And obviously, we'll kind of Minnesota Moneyball. Obviously, you guys remember the movie Moneyball. Made a lot of tough financial decisions in order to build a team without spending too much money, which we'll get into that a little bit later with a certain player who might be taking up a large portion of our cap hit. But first, let's start with his ties to certain head coaches, because obviously the next step in the next, probably the biggest step in his job and what might define his success here in Minnesota is picking the correct head coach, right?
Yes.
Obviously,
Which I did just mention that it'll probably be. We also want someone that is willing to collaborate with them and stuff like that. But yeah, continue.
Yep. And there are some coaches that he had a little bit of time with. Their stints in certain teams overlapped. Obviously, one of the first ones we could talk about is DeMeco Ryans, a young defensive coordinator from San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, we saw what they did to the Packers. Fuck the Packers, by the way. So I know he's
fuck the Packers.
Exactly. I know he's one that we have interviewed. I think he'd be a very good fit. Him and Kwesi overlapped in San Francisco a few years back. So that's definitely a direction they could go. Maybe he could bring a guy like Mike McDaniel with him. I don't know much about Mike McDaniel, but I saw one of his press conferences. I think the guy's hilarious. So I'd be cool bringing him in. So, I think that people are kind of speculating that maybe that is the big domino that'll fall right there, is he'll be the guy because Kwesi can put in a good word for him. I'd be 100% fine with it. I mean, obviously, we've heard some of the other people they've talked about, Todd Bowles, who I think Todd Bowles is probably going to be out of the picture now with Kwesi. I don't think they have really any connection, which doesn't mean anything, but I don't see Todd Bowles being there. And really, it sounds like maybe Morris might be in there, and then Kevin O'Connell from the Rams. I'm not sure if he has any overlapping with those guys at all that you've heard of.
Not that I know of. The only other one that kind of pops up is Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's worth mentioning too, because I think there was like a someone said, I don't know
Yeah.
who it was, a
Don't count
coach or
Minnesota
something
out.
like that, that's
Yeah.
closer to Jim Harbaugh, who said like, hey, don't sleep on the Vikings as
I think
far as
it was a Michigan beat writer.
okay. Yeah, as far as the Vikings being, because now with Kwesi, especially, they have worked together and stuff like that. So hey,
Yeah.
that's still an option too. And
Yeah.
I did want to mention, like you said, D'Amico Ryans, which honestly I'd be really cool with that. I think if we got Jim Harbaugh, that'd be interesting. But I think it's gonna end up being a younger a younger head coach. We went younger for GM, so I think that
And
will
that,
go
yeah.
younger with head coach as well.
And I think that's part of the
D'Amico
reason why Todd Bowles might be out of the running at the moment.
Right, right. So I could see D'Amico Ryans, and I really do like that. I gotta stay true to myself and be honest and say I did want a head coach that's offensive minded, and I do think that's the best route for right now, anyways. But as a defensive coordinator, D'Amico Ryans is a really good choice. And you've mentioned this before, and I probably let you elaborate a little bit. But you just mentioned that if we can get a coach who is defensive, it doesn't even matter if they're offensive or defensive, really. You just want that guy to be the leader and kind of control the whole team
Yeah.
and kind of have an offensive coordinator come in who controls the offense, and a defensive coordinator who controls the defense, who I hope continues to be Andre Patterson. But the only thing I do worry about that is when we did have Zimmer, a lot of our offensive coordinators left or quit or whatever, got fired, and that each year we kind of had like a new offensive coordinator come in
Right.
and like a new system with is something that I'm worried with, because it's
Yeah.
something that our offensive has already had to deal with and
Yeah.
go
That
through.
that is always a concern for sure. But I mean, but the thing is, we go back to what we were talking about a little earlier here. Is I think it all comes down to finding the correct leadership. I mean, obviously Zimmer, when he first started, the leadership was good. Everybody kind of said it, and some people liked him throughout his career. But he was that the defensive coordinator who just kind of he was too in. He was all over the defense, which wasn't very good, and too in on the offense, and he wouldn't let the offensive coordinators do what they wanted, which is why a
Right.
lot of them quit. If offensive
True,
coordinators get
true.
promoted, that's a good thing, because it means something is working.
Right.
And I just hope,
Like Stefanski.
right, and maybe D'Amico Ryans would have a little bit of, like, here's what I picture a good offense. I'll hire an offensive coordinator who will do that, but at the same time, I'll give them full autonomy over the offense. I'll instill my philosophy on defense and have someone cover that, but I want to be the head coach of the entire team. And I think that's a big thing. And it sounds like he's very well respected by by players in San Francisco, which is another thing you want.
And
you want
fans.
a guy who respects their coach. I mean, like Eric Kendricks talked about, you want a guy who you feel like you can talk to. You don't want a guy who's going to be like that kind of standoffish, gruff attitude.
Yeah.
Like kind of like Zimmer was.
Right.
So,
and you don't want them the GM and the head coach to not talk for months
exactly,
at a time.
Yeah, but I just want a head coach of the football team. That's really what I'm looking for. A guy who will coach the team and let his coordinators do what they need to do. Obviously, again, the head coach instills the philosophy of the offense and defense. I feel like he says, here's what I'm looking to run, but again, won't have his thumb on the button as much as Zimmer did. But here's how we're going to run this offense. If you sway from it, we're done.
Right.
I'm hoping with these guys being younger, with a more open mindset, they'll be like, here's what I want to run, but you can convince me why we should span out that offensive play calling system or defense, what have you. But yeah, so we're talking a lot about D'Amico Ryans. I would be excited about that. One little head coaching tidbit I want to toss out there. I'm a little bit confused why there's been no conversations with Bieniemy, Dayball, or even Doug Peterson. Again, maybe the age thing has something to do with it. Maybe Dayball, and who knows? We could have easily reached out, and they could have just said, no, we're not interested in interviewing there. That could be something that happened too. Maybe they want to stay where they're at. I don't really know. Maybe Bieniemy wants to stay in Kansas City. Everybody always thinks, why are they passing him up? Like, does he want to go? I don't know. But I was just very it was odd to me that they weren't.
Yeah, I agree. I was really surprised that we've spent more time on defensive coordinators than offensive. So it does feel like we're going that direction. But yeah, maybe it doesn't even matter. Maybe it's just, we're looking for the right leader and the right personality, despite what their background looks like.
Yeah. But let's go back to that Moneyball thing we were talking about a little bit.
Let's go. The next Moneyball.
Yep, the next Moneyball. So obviously,
Moneyball.
I think something that's very attractive about this team is there are a lot of, obviously us as fans, we'd hate to see it happen, but there's a lot of tradable assets on this team. A lot of guys with bigger contracts you could get rid of to kind of shed some cap space. Here's a big one, though. Kirk Cousins. there's been rumors circulating that we might be trading him. One of the spots was the Cleveland Browns, and now we have that direct line to the Cleveland Browns organization, right?
Right.
Kwesi, man, talk to your guy over there. Let's get this done. Let's get rid of Kirk Cousins. You trade him there. I mean, there's an open avenue to that happening now.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting how that works because if Kwesi was part of the group that maybe would want Kirk Cousins and then he goes to the team that has Kirk Cousins, would he still want to trade him? That part I don't know. And then I've seen a lot of people say, would you like trade Kirk Cousins for Baker? And that's something I don't want to do. And I don't think we should do unless there's picks involved.
Right.
Because
I think what might happen, I was talking to another guy at work about this yesterday. He brought up, I read an article somewhere. What might happen is in order to get Cleveland to take on the full Kirk Cousins contract. I mean, obviously, I think we still got to take on the $10 million dead on the cap. But in order to get them to take on the full contract, we would take Baker, and you drop that first round pick probably down to a second round pick, maybe. But I could see it too, where if maybe, who knows, maybe they will get the first round pick. Maybe they leave Baker out of the deal. Who really knows? But I think it would have to be some way we'd have to take Baker on because they have him on that 5th-year option, which is a pretty decent salary cap hit. I'm not sure what it is. But maybe if we agree to take half of the Cousins contract, maybe that second round pick could be bumped up to a first round pick. I don't really know. Right. But I think that's why Baker Mayfield's being tossed out there, just because of the salary cap issues with the Browns, of course, if they took on that Cousins contract, and the fact that that's the only way we'd be able to unload the whole contracts if we take some picks and if we take a lesser pick and take Baker.
Yeah, as far as we know, and like we said, we're talking about the Kirk Cousins thing. That's Kwesi's second huge task as being our GM. But another interesting thing about all that is, there is other teams that really need quarterbacks. This is a really good year, I would say, for needing a head coach, and there's plenty of people who need a head coach, but a really good year to potentially trade a quarterback for higher value than you would on any other year, because there's so many quarterback needy teams that have the talent around them that they could find like that veteran guy that they want to come in. They think it's the final piece to their puzzle to win a Super Bowl. So that's out there. And then another interesting thing to that is to see how the Rams are succeeding and with Matt Stafford and all the picks that they gave for Matt Stafford and seeing it actually work out. And their success, it's already, they're in the NFC Championship. That's already very successful. If they win this week and go to the Super Bowl, I think that can only bring up the value of Kirk Cousins right now in this upcoming offseason. So I think Kwesi, whether it's the Browns or not, because he came from that organization, but I think it gives him a chance to really try to kind of find the best deal potentially. And, hopefully with his mindset and stuff like that, he can kind of be, I'm hoping he ends up being just like a trading beast in all of this. Maybe that's something that's good about the analytics and stuff like that. And maybe like getting good deals and know when it's not good based on contracts and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah. And another thing, obviously I know people like you, they heard you say a lot of quarterback needy teams, maybe not the best draft class for quarterbacks. People would ask, why would you trade Kirk Cousins? Maybe Kwesi looks at this roster and says, hey, if we trade this guy, and let's say we take in, use it as an example. Let's say we take in Baker Mayfield. He'd have more talent here receiver-wise than he had in Cleveland. Obviously, I think him and OBJ, they have those personalities that just clash. So I think that was a big problem there. But I think here, if you get a guy like him, I'm not saying him in particular. I'm just saying if that's the guy if that's what ended up happening, maybe Kwesi sees like that's a lower cap number. We'd be able to take that extra money that we unload with the Cousins contract. I'd be able to build around him, get him a better offensive line. He'd have two stud receivers, two very good receivers on that football team, a stud tight end and Irv Smith potentially next year, elite running back and Delvin Cook. Take the extra money, build that defense back up, let DeMeco Ryans do his magic, and boom, there you go. You got a Super Bowl contender.
DeMeco Ryans is the next head coach, by the way. Nobody knows it, but
let's say you bring in a guy like that, and there you go. You have the plan. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Is Kirk Cousins going to be better than Baker Mayfield as a quarterback? Yeah, definitely. But could the team around Baker Mayfield be better here than it was in Cleveland? It very well could be. Obviously the Cleveland had a stacked defense, but the receiver core, let's be honest, OBJ, good. He's a good receiver, but him and Baker didn't get along. Jarvis Landry, he's probably a number 2 receiver on most teams, and they had Austin Hooper at tight end. They did not have much there. So, on a team like this, I think a guy like Baker could be Jameis Winston for all I care. for a cheaper cap number. Those guys
Right.
could thrive in a situation in Minnesota here,
Yeah.
and you'd be able to pay them less.
Right. And Baker was a first overall pick, and he still can easily show a lot of potential. I mean,
right.
In my opinion, so far watching him, it doesn't seem like he's that franchise guy, but he still has that opportunity to do that. And if we did get him, it wouldn't be like we don't have to come. I think it'd be like a 1 year, $18 million. And then I think he's off the books next year if we wanted to.
Yep. So it'll be a 1 year project. I see what happens.
1 year project. And I mean, you never know. He could end up fulfilling that potential that we seen as it when he was a rookie. And last year, 2 years ago was also really good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he could come in and do that. So that is an interesting take. And I would be willing to do that because I don't think Kirk is that guy long-term.
No.
Though I do hope because of Kirk's value and because I think other teams, there's not a veteran out there, I think, going into this year, unless it's Russell Wilson, of course, that is like Kirk Cousins, honestly, as far as his stats and stuff goes.
Imagine that, a Vikings podcast. It started out talking about a GM, all of a sudden turns into a
Kirk Cousins.
Kirk Cousins or not. Really, never would.
Well, that's an important role he's got this time. This is, I mean,
I know.
He came in at we get to see how he is right off the bat. We get to see what type of GM he's going to be and everything. Like, boom, year one, first 3 months is going to be crazy. We got head coach Kirk Cousins, draft, free agency. It's going to be boom, 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 boom to see. So it's going to be really nice. But Kirk Cousins is a big part of it, and I'm hoping that his value has risen. And I think to the point where I think Baker Mayfield and his contract situation and stuff like that isn't going to be enough to get a guy like Kirk Cousins, because there's going to be other teams that think Kirk's the final piece to their puzzle.
Well, maybe Kwesi can start a bidding war. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, there you go, Kwesi. Us, a couple podcasters are telling you your next 2 steps: find your head coach, figure out your quarterback situation, get money, win games. Let's go
get money, win games, Super Bowl.
We'll get it. All right. So with that being said, thank you guys for checking out this episode of the GG Sports Podcast. Right over here, check out some other videos of ours you may like, as well as don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the button over here. Comment your thoughts on our thoughts on the new hiring of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah for the Minnesota Vikings. And also leave a like if you enjoyed the video. We will see you guys next time.
SKOL Vikes.